Walk into any drugstore in 1952 and you will find shelves packed with shampoo bottles, glossy advertisements promising softer hair, cleaner scalps, modern beauty in a single wash. Now walk into the bathroom of the woman buying those bottles, and you will find something the advertisements never mentioned. She owns the shampoo, yes. She might use it once a week, sometimes once every 2 weeks, occasionally less than that. The rest of the time, her hair is maintained by methods that have almost nothing to do with what we today consider hair care. And the results are the polished, voluminous, almost architectural waves you see in every photograph from that decade. The secret of 1950s hair was never the shampoo. The secret was everything that happened between washes. And that is the part the marketing campaigns of the era spent enormous effort trying to make women forget. To understand why, you have to understand the bathroom of a typical American home in the early 1950s. Hot water was not infinite. In many homes, it came from a small tank that took time to refill and cost real money to heat. A daily shower was not a casual ritual, but a deliberate use of a limited resource. And washing long, set, carefully waved hair every day made no practical sense. Hairstyles of that era were not designed to be washed. They were designed to be built once and maintained for days, sometimes a full week, through techniques that protected the structure of the set. The woman in the kitchen frying breakfast had hair that had been arranged on Sunday evening and was expected to look presentable until Friday or Saturday. The shampoo bottle on the shelf was not for daily use. It was for the reset at the end of the cycle. What kept the hair clean and elegant in between was a combination of 3 things that have almost entirely disappeared from the modern bathroom. And the first of them is the simplest. It is the bristle brush, not a plastic brush, not a vented brush with rubber teeth, but a dense brush made from natural boar bristle, used every single night before bed with a specific motion that women learned from their mothers and grandmothers. The bristles were stiff enough to penetrate the hair to the scalp, but soft enough to glide through without breaking the strands. Each night, sitting at a vanity or on the edge of a bed, the woman would tip her head forward and brush from the nape of the neck outward, then from the temples down, then from the crown all the way to the ends. 100 strokes was the traditional number, and while the exact count was more cultural than scientific, the practice itself had a very real mechanical effect. The natural oil that the scalp produces, called sebum, was distributed evenly down the length of every strand. The dust and surface dirt accumulated during the day were lifted away. The hair was conditioned by its own body, polished by friction, and left visibly shinier by morning. No bottle on the market today replicates what a wooden boar bristle brush did for the women of that era. The second element is what we would now call dry shampoo, except the women of 1952 did not buy it in an aerosol can and did not call it by that name. They used powder. Sometimes it was pure cornstarch from the kitchen pantry, sometimes talcum powder from the bath, sometimes a fine cosmetic powder kept specifically for the hair. The technique was straightforward. A small amount sprinkled at the roots, worked in gently with the fingertips, allowed to sit for a minute or 2, and then brushed out completely with that same bristle brush. The powder absorbed the excess oil that accumulated between washes, particularly at the part line and around the hairline, where modern eyes spot greasy roots first. After brushing, no powder remained visible, but the hair looked freshly clean, lifted at the roots, lighter and more voluminous. The entire process took less than 5 minutes and could be done in the morning before the husband woke up. It cost essentially nothing. A box of cornstarch lasted months. The third element is the one that built the silhouette every modern stylist still imitates when they want to evoke the decade, and it is the most labor-intensive of the 3. Setting the hair in pin curls or rollers, almost always done at night, sometimes done midweek to refresh a fading wave. The woman would dampen her hair slightly, often with a setting lotion made from sugar and water or from a thin homemade gel, and then section the hair carefully and wind each section around itself, pinning it flat against the scalp with bobby pins or rolling it onto small fabric or sponge curlers. She would then tie a silk or satin scarf over her head to protect the curls and sleep on them through the night. Cotton pillowcases were avoided by the women who cared most about their hair, because cotton absorbs moisture and creates friction that disturbs the set. Silk was preferred not as a luxury, but as a tool. In the morning the curlers came out. The hair was brushed through with that same Boar bristle brush, shaped with the fingers, and lightly sprayed only at the very end. The result was the structured wave, the soft curl at the shoulder, the bounce that defines every photograph of that decade. What made all of this work? And this is the part most often misunderstood today, is that the scalp had been allowed to find its own rhythm. The modern habit of washing the hair every day, sometimes twice a day, with strong surfactants that strip away every trace of natural oil, trains the scalp to overproduce sebum to compensate. The more you wash, the more your scalp produces, the more you feel you need to wash again. The women of the 1950s had broken this cycle, or rather, they had never ended it in the first place. By washing only once a week, sometimes less, they allowed their scalps to settle into a balanced production of oil that protected the hair, conditioned it naturally, and was redistributed each night by the brush. Their hair was not greasy because the system was working as it was supposed to work. Their hair shone because it was coated in its own conditioning film. Their hair held a set because the cuticle was sealed by oil rather than swollen open by repeated washing. The shampoos of that era, when they were used, were also fundamentally different from what we know today. The harshest modern detergents had not yet entered mainstream hair care. The bottles on the drugstore shelves contained gentler surfactants, often olive oil or coconut-based, and the wash itself was a slow, deliberate event. The woman would wet her hair in the bathroom sink rather than under a shower, often using a pitcher of warm water, working the shampoo through with her fingertips, and following it with a rinse of cold water mixed with a small amount of vinegar or lemon juice. The acid rinse closed the cuticle, neutralized the alkalinity of the soap, and left the hair with that almost glass-like reflective surface that defined the era. There was no separate conditioner step because there did not need to be one. The oil that returned to the hair within 24 hours did the work that a conditioner does today. Have you ever wondered why every photograph of an ordinary woman from that decade, not a movie star, not a model, just a woman at a backyard barbecue or sitting on a porch, shows hair that looks fuller and shinier than what most people manage today with an entire shelf of expensive products? The answer is what we have just described. The system was complete. Brush, powder, set, occasional gentle wash, acidic rinse, and a scalp left in balance. Every step supported every other step. Modern hair care is a collection of products that often work against each other. The 1950s routine was a closed loop, refined over generations, and it produced results that were not the exception, but the rule. What do you think your hair would look like if you tried even 3 of these techniques for a single month? And which one do you think would be the hardest to commit to in your current routine? There is one more piece of the picture that needs to be added, because without it the description is not complete. The beauty parlor. Not every woman did everything at home. In small towns and large cities alike, women visited a hairdresser once a week, usually on Friday or Saturday, for a wash and set that would carry them through the next 7 days. The cost was modest by today's standards, sometimes the equivalent of what a coffee costs now. The hairdresser would shampoo with those gentler soaps, set the hair in rollers, and place the woman under a large hooded dryer for 30 to 45 minutes while she read magazines or chatted with neighbors. The result, when she emerged, was a set so structured and so carefully placed that with nightly brushing and a silk scarf at bedtime, it would survive until the following week. This is the social ritual that connected the home routine to the professional one. And it explains why the average woman of that decade did not feel she needed to wash her hair more often. The system around her supported the choice. The disappearance of all of this happened slowly, and then suddenly. Through the 1960s and into the 1970s, marketing campaigns began pushing the idea that hair needed to be washed more frequently. New formulations of shampoo became cheaper and more accessible, often using harsher detergents that produced more lather and felt more cleansing in the moment. Hair dryers shrank from hood to handheld and made daily styling possible without a salon. The pink curl gave way to the blowout. The bristle brush was replaced by plastic. The cornstarch in the pantry stayed in the pantry. By the 1980s, daily shampooing had become not just normal, but expected, and the entire architecture of slow, deliberate, balanced hair care that defined the previous generation was almost completely forgotten. What replaced it sold more bottles, more tills, more products. What it did not necessarily produce was better hair. The interesting thing is that everything described here is returning, piece by piece, often under new names and at premium prices. Dry shampoo in expensive aerosol cans is the cornstarch your grandmother used for free. Silk pillowcases sold for the price of a dinner replicate the silk scarf women wore for the cost of a few cents of fabric. Boar bristle brushes are now marketed as luxury items in beauty stores. The technique of washing hair less often has been rebranded as a method, given a name, written about in magazines as if it were a recent discovery. The acidic rinse is sold in bottles labeled as clarifying treatments. The slow setting of hair overnight has reappeared as a trend among younger women on the internet, who film themselves wrapping their hair in fabric strips and waking up to waves, often unaware that they are recreating something their great-grandmothers did every single night without thinking about it. What the women of the 1950s understood, even if they would not have phrased it this way, is that hair is not a surface to be cleaned, but a system to be maintained. The shampoo was a tool used sparingly because the rest of the system did the daily work. The shine was not bought. It was produced by the body itself and protected by careful technique. The volume was not from a product. It was from the structure of a set held in place by patients. The whole regimen cost almost nothing in money and a great deal in time. And time was the resource the women of the era spent on the things they considered important, which included looking good for themselves and for their families. That accounting, time exchanged for visible quality, is what has been lost. It has been replaced by money exchanged for products that often leave the hair worse than it started. So the next time you see a photograph from that decade, the woman at the picnic with the perfect waves, the office worker on the bus with hair that catches the light, the housewife in a magazine advertisement holding a casserole dish with a set that has clearly survived a full day of cooking, look at it differently. You are not looking at a styling trick or a vintage filter. You are looking at the visible result of a complete philosophy of hair, built on patience, on understanding the natural function of the scalp, on a handful of cheap household items, and on a refusal to let an industry tell you that more washing means more clean. The shine in those photographs is real. The fullness is real. The structure is real. And almost none of it came from the bottle on the bathroom shelf. If you found this glimpse into how an entire generation maintained itself without the products we now consider essential as fascinating as I did, consider subscribing so you do not miss the next story about how ordinary people of the past solved problems we have managed to make complicated again. And if you know someone who has ever wondered why their hair never looks as effortlessly polished as the women in those old photographs, send this to them. They are probably one bristle brush and a box of cornstarch away from understanding why.